Today our notes are going to begin on page 18. We've already talked about Sternger, the characteristics of life, or all the functions that every living organism has to perform. And now we're actually going to talk about different categories or different kingdoms of living organisms. So living organisms share many characteristics, but they come in many different forms. Organisms can be grouped or classified into 6 major kingdoms based on their similarities and differences. So those six kingdoms will be archaebacteria, eubacteria, protista, fungi, animals, and plants. So the first 2 kingdoms that we have are the bacteria kingdoms. We have eubacteria and archaebacteria. For eubacteria, it's a kingdom of simple, unicellular, one cell. Uni means one. Organisms known as prokaryotes. And a lot of us have probably heard of that term before. A prokaryote is a simple-celled organism. These are the main bacteria you hear of, like staph and strep and salmonella. These are the bacteria that can actually make you sick, and generally are the ones that make you sick. Okay? Not all bacteria make you sick, but if there's one of these, like a staph infection, that's going to be from your eubacteria. We haven't really talked much about cells yet, but one thing that you need to know about for your prokaryotes is that they don't have a nucleus, okay? So they have no nucleus. And this just means that they're very, very simple. There's no true nucleus inside of them. So that's actually before or prior to the nucleus. So these are actually usually very ancient organisms as well. These, or bacteria, have been one of the longest living organisms that we know of. The second kingdom is your archaebacteria, and sometimes you hear it as archae. The archaebacteria are a kingdom of simple, prokaryotic, unicellular organisms. So again, no nucleus, made of one cell, and they live in extreme environments. And so a lot of times you'll hear them as being called extreme mophiles. Okay? They can live in areas with really, really high or really, really low pH, really acidic places. They can live in places with really high temperatures and places with really large amounts of salt or salinity. Okay? And so the Dead Sea is one of the saltiest bodies of water on Earth. And the only thing that can live there are these special type of bacteria. And that's actually going to be because of the fact that they have special enzymes that allow them to survive there. Remember that if you go beyond your norm or beyond your optimum, move very far from what's normal for you, that your enzymes can become denatured. But with the archaebacteria, they can survive those conditions. So our next 2 kingdoms are the protists and the plants. Now, protists are a kingdom of organisms that are complex. They are actually composed of eukaryotic cells. Which actually means they have a nucleus. EU means true. Karyotic means nucleus, so they have a true nucleus. But some are unicellular. So for our protists, some are made up of one cell and some are made of many or multiple cells. These include algae and brain-eating amoebas, which we'll talk about a little more later on. The protists are kind of this strange category, not quite a plant, not quite an animal, but they can be plant-like algae, and perform photosynthesis, or they can be animal-like amoeba, and actually have to consume food. The next category, or next kingdom, is going to be the plant kingdom. And they are also going to be made up of multicellular complex cells. So there are going to be many cells, or many eukaryotic cells, that make up the plants. And plants have to make their own food, and this is going to be through photosynthesis, which we'll learn about a lot more later on. Okay? We also might want to go ahead and add up to protists that they could be plant-like and animal-like. Okay? So that's our fourth kingdom there with the plants. Some images of protists are down here. Here's a picture of an algae, okay? And here's a picture of an amoeba, so the animal-like and plant-like protist. And the last two kingdoms we have are going to be our last two kingdoms will be our fungi and our animals. Fungi are a kingdom of complex organisms, complex cells, so they are also eukaryotic cells. They actually consume, this says consume, C-O-N-S-U-M-E, consume their food extracellularly. So that means they actually eat their food outside of their cells. And these include mushrooms, molds, and yeast. Fungi are actually more closely related to animals than they are related to plants. And the reason for that is because of one of the reasons for that is because of how they consume their food, extracellularly. A mushroom or a fungus will actually secrete some enzymes, so actually release some enzymes outside of its cell, outside of its body in a way. And those enzymes will break down the food and then can reabsorb and pull that back up. And so because they don't make their own food, they do not make their own food, they do not do photosynthesis, they are not plant-like. And then we have our animal kingdom, and our animal kingdom is made up of complex organisms that move and consume food. And so our fungi and our animals are going to be made up of eukaryotic cells, okay, complex cells with a nucleus. And again, they are more closely related than a fungus and a plant would be related. And the final thing we have here is a little bit on viruses. A virus is actually not considered living. Remember that to be considered living, you have to do all of the stir and grow processes. So you have to be able to synthesize, you have to be able to reproduce on your own, go through respiration on your own. You have to do all those functions. But with a virus actually cannot perform all of those life functions. And actually, they don't really perform any of them. They reproduce, but that's all they do. But they can't reproduce by themselves. So because of that, they aren't considered living. A virus has to invade your cells, infect your cells, in order to make copies of itself. And this is a general diagram of a virus. A virus has a little head area that contains DNA inside of it, has a little tail area, and this is where it's going to inject its DNA into your cells and make you sick. But we will talk about that a little more later on. And finally, it's a really short section of notes today. For your summary box, what I want you to do is write 3 sentences. For each of those 3 sentences, you'll choose 2 different kingdoms and either explain why they are similar or why they are different from each other. And make sure these are detailed sentences because we will be looking at this more later on. Okay, this is going to come back. So again, make sure you have your 3 sentences in your summary box and that there's 2 different kingdoms for each sentence.